The high desert nights were Sabrina Hale's sanctuary. When the sun sank behind the distant buttes and the land fell quiet, she climbed the narrow ladder to the roof of her small homestead and spread her blankets beneath the open sky. The day belonged to chores, neighbors, and the careful politeness expected of a widow. But the night belonged only to her and the stars. Sabrina traced constellations with practiced ease, her fingers moving across the dark like she could touch the heavens themselves. Orion's belt, Cassiopeia's crooked throne, the long arc of the Milky Way stretching across the black canvas like a pale river. She sketched quickly in her worn leather journal, charcoal smudging her fingertips, the paper soft from years of use. Her husband, Thomas, had taught her the stars. They'd spent their first year of marriage lying side by side on this same roof, whispering dreams and naming constellations as though they were old friends. He'd promised her they'd map the entire sky together, that they'd leave behind something lasting proof that they had looked up, even when life below was hard. Thomas had died 3 winters ago in a freak ranch accident, thrown from a spooked horse. The sky hadn't changed that night. The stars still burned just as bright. Sabrina swallowed the familiar ache and kept drawing. Grief had driven her upward. When the weight of the empty house pressed too hard on her chest, she escaped to the roof. The stars did not pity her. They did not rush her healing. They simply existed, steady, ancient, unbroken. And somehow that steadiness kept her breathing. A sound below made her pause. Hoofbeat. Sabrina stiffened, charcoal frozen midline. Visitors were rare this far from town, especially after dusk. She rose carefully and peered over the edge of the roof. A lone rider approached, his horse moving slow and cautious. The man sat tall in the saddle, hat brim low, coat dusted from long travel. He reined in near the fence and lifted his gaze, not toward the house, but upward, toward the sky that, more than anything, unsettled her. She descended the ladder, heart thudding louder with each step. By the time she reached the yard, the man had dismounted, his horse cropping grass nearby. "Evenin'," he said, voice calm and unthreatening. "Hope I'm not in Sabrina kept her distance. "You are. It's late," he nodded, accepting the rebuke easily. "Fair enough. I saw your lamp from the trail. Didn't expect to find someone watching the stars from a homestead roof." Her jaw tightened. People cope how they can. A flicker of understanding crossed his face. He reached into his saddlebag slowly, deliberately, and pulled out a rolled parchment and a brass instrument that caught the moonlight. "Astronomer," he said simply. "Name's Gideon Cross. I chart stars for folks who need maps for navigation, mostly. I'm passing through." Sabrina's breath caught, despite herself. The instrument, the parchment, the careful way he held them, like sacred things. "You map the sky?" she asked, before she could stop herself. Gideon smiled faintly. "I try. Truth is, the sky does most of the work. I just listen." Something loosened in her chest, something she'd kept tightly bound for years. She hesitated, then gestured toward the house. "I chart them too." His brows lifted, surprise softening his features. "Then maybe," he said gently, "we're looking at the same story." Above them, the stars burned on, unaware that 2 wounded souls had just found the same constellation of hope. Sabrina hadn't planned on inviting a stranger into her world. Yet there she was, standing beside Gideon, cross beneath the wide western sky. The space between them filled with a silence that felt less threatening than expected. The stars shimmered overhead, and for the first time in years, she felt oddly self-conscious beneath them. "You can stay," she said at last, surprising herself. "If you mean no harm." Gideon inclined his head. "I swear it. I'll keep to the stars." She almost smiled at that. They climbed to the roof together, Gideon following her careful steps up the ladder. He paused when he reached the top, taking in the spread of blankets. the lantern weighted with stones, and the open journal filled with charcoal sketches. "You've been doing this a long time," he murmured. "Since before I was a widow," Sabrina replied, a note of steel in her voice. Since when it mattered, Gideon didn't flinch. Instead, he sat cross-legged a respectful distance away and unfolded his parchment. His map was far more precise than hers inked lines, measured angles, notes in a meticulous hand. Sabrina glanced between his map and her own rough sketches, suddenly embarrassed by the difference. "Yours is beautiful," Gideon said, noticing her gaze. "It tells a story. Mine tells the truth," she countered quietly. "The stars don't care about neat lines." He chuckled softly. Fair enough. For a time, they worked in companionable silence. Gideon adjusted his brass sextant, sighting angles between stars. Sabrina sketched, shading faint clusters, and noting changes she'd observed over seasons. The wind carried the scent of sage and dry earth, and the night wrapped around them like a shared secret. "You live out here alone?" Gideon asked eventually. "Yes, no family, buried on this land," she said simply. He nodded, understanding, settling in his expression. "Loss teaches us how big the sky really is." Sabrina studied him. His face bore lines of travel and thought, but his eyes held something deeper, an ache familiar enough to make her chest tighten. "You lost someone," she said. Gideon hesitated. "Not one person. A direction," he gestured skyward. "I used to believe if I mapped enough stars, I'd find my way back to who I was meant to be." "And did you?" He met her gaze. "Not yet." The honesty startled her. She returned to her journal, but her hand trembled slightly as she drew. As the hours passed, Gideon pointed out shifts she hadn't noticed, subtle changes in a cluster near the horizon. A star she'd assumed fixed, but wasn't. Sabrina shared patterns Thomas had taught her. Old names passed down from frontier folk who believed the stars watched over them. "My husband said the sky remembers us," she said quietly. "That even when we're gone, the stars carry our stories." Gideon listened, as though every word mattered. "Then maybe he's still up there," he said softly. "Guiding you." The lump in her throat surprised her. She'd avoided talking about Thomas for years, fearing the flood it might unleash. But with Gideon, the words felt safe. A coyote howled in the distance, sharp and lonely. Gideon glanced toward the horizon. "I planned to ride on at first light." Sabrina felt an unexpected pang. "You don't have to rush." "I don't want to impose." "You aren't," she said quickly, then corrected herself. "If you'd like, you can stay another night. The Perseids peak tomorrow. Best meteor shower of the season." His face lit with quiet wonder. "You'd share that with me?" She nodded. "The sky's big enough." Gideon smiled, a warmth there that made her look away. Above them, a shooting star streaked across the dark, brief and brilliant. For the first time since Thomas's death, Sabrina didn't wish alone upon it. Morning came softer than Sabrina expected. She woke to the smell of coffee drifting through the open window, unfamiliar kindness in a house that had known only her routines for years. For a brief, disorienting moment, she reached for Thomas out of habit. Her hand met empty sheets, and the ache returned, dull but manageable. Downstairs, Gideon stood at the small stove, his coat draped over a chair, sleeves rolled up as if he belonged there. He turned when he heard her footsteps, concern flickering across his face. "I hope you don't mind," he said. "Figured I owed you breakfast for the roof space." "You didn't owe me anything," Sabrina replied, though the tightness in her chest eased. "But thank you." They ate quietly, sunlight spilling across the worn table. Gideon spoke little, respecting the rhythm of her home, and that restraint made his presence easier to accept. The day passed slower than most. Gideon helped mend a loose fence rail, steady and capable, without offering unnecessary advice. Sabrina caught herself watching the way he moved, purposeful but gentle, as though the land itself guided him. By afternoon, clouds gathered low on the horizon. "Storm's coming," Gideon said, scanning the sky. might blur the stars tonight. Sabrina felt a flicker of disappointment she hadn't expected. They'll still be there, always are, he agreed. When night fell, the storm held off just enough to leave the sky bruised with clouds. Stars blinking through in scattered fragments. They returned to the roof anyway, lantern glowing low between them. Gideon unrolled his parchment and hesitated. "There's something I haven't told you." Sabrina tensed. "You don't owe me your story. I want to give it," he said. She waited. "I used to travel with my wife," Gideon began. "She had the gift, could read the sky like a book. I learned to map so I could keep up with her." His jaw tightened. "She died on the trail. Fever, I kept going, because stopping felt like burying her twice." Sabrina's breath caught. "I'm sorry." "So am I," he said quietly. "Every night, I tell myself, the stars remember her better than I can." Something inside Sabrina shifted, subtle as a constellation changing position over years. She reached out without thinking, her fingers brushing his knuckles in anchor, not a promise. "You remember," she said. "That's enough." Their hands lingered before parting, the contact leaving warmth behind. The sky cleared near midnight, clouds unraveling to reveal a cascade of stars. The Perseids began to fall, white streaks cutting across the dark. "There," Gideon said softly. "Right where your map marks the old hunter." Sabrina laughed, startled by the sound. Thomas insisted that star was stubborn. Never moved the way it should. "Maybe it waited for the right moment," Gideon said. Another meteor flared brighter than the rest. Sabrina felt the weight of grief light not disappear, but loosen. Gideon wasn't replacing Thomas. He wasn't meant to. But he stood beside her, looking at the same sky, carrying his own losses with care. As dawn approached, Gideon grew quiet. "I leave tomorrow," he said finally. Sabrina's heart stumbled. "Of course, I don't want to," he admitted. "But I don't know how to stay." She swallowed. "Neither do I." They sat in silence until the sky paled, stars fading one by one. When Gideon descended the ladder, he paused. "Sabrina," he said, "if the stars ever lead me back here, would that be all right?" She met his gaze. "The sky's always open." And as the sun rose, Sabrina realized something terrifying and hopeful all at once. The map of her heart was changing. Gideon stayed, not because the stars demanded it, and not because Sabrina asked, but because the sky itself seemed to press pause on his leaving. A second storm rolled in, heavier this time, drenching the trail and turning the lowlands to mud. Gideon's horse needed rest, and Sabrina's homestead, quiet and steadfast, became a shelter neither of them pretended was temporary. They settled into a fragile rhythm. By day, Gideon worked alongside Sabrina, as though he'd always been there, stacking firewood, repairing a loose shutter, tending the small vegetable patch Thomas had once planted. He never moved anything without asking, never assumed ownership of her space. That respect built something sturdier than words. At night, they returned to the roof. Gideon began helping her refine her star maps, not by correcting them, but by listening. "Your lines tell how the sky feels," he said one evening. "Mine tell where it is. Maybe together they tell the truth." She smiled at that soft, unguarded. One night, Sabrina pulled out a final journal she'd kept hidden beneath the floorboard. Its pages were nearly empty. "I stopped mapping after Thomas died," she confessed. "Felt like finishing the sky without him would be a betrayal." Gideon traced the worn leather cover gently. And now I think he'd be angry if I didn't keep looking up." They shared a quiet laugh. Grief and love braided together. The town noticed Gideon soon enough. Whispers followed him when he rode in for supplies, curiosity sharpened by the sight of him returning to Sabrina's land each evening. Sabrina braced herself for judgment, but none came. The widow who watched stars had always been a mystery. A wandering astronomer only deepened it. One afternoon, Gideon found her standing at Thomas's grave, wildflowers clutched tight in her hands. "I didn't mean to intrude," he said, stopping several paces back. "You aren't," she replied. "I was just telling him about you." Gideon's breath hitched. Was he, all right with that? Sabrina turned, eyes steady. He trusted the stars. I think he'd trust the man who listens to them. Gideon removed his hat, reverent. For the first time in years, Sabrina felt the past loosen its grip, not erased, but honored. That night, the sky was impossibly clear. They lay side by side, shoulders brushing. Gideon pointed to a cluster he hadn't named on any official map. I've been thinking, he said. Some constellations don't need ancient names. Maybe they're meant for moments instead. Sabrina followed his finger. What would you call that one? Foam, he said simply. Her breath caught. She turned toward him, searching his face for hesitation. There was none, only hope, quiet and brave. She reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. Then maybe, she whispered, you've already found your direction. The stars shimmered above them, patient witnesses. For the first time, Sabrina didn't fear loving again. The sky hadn't taken anything from her, had led something back. The sky was different. The night Gideon chose to stay for good. Not brighter, not clearer, just fuller. As if it knew what was about to be decided beneath it. Sabrina felt it in the stillness of the air, in the way the stars seemed to press closer, listening. They stood at the edge of the homestead. Gideon's packed saddle resting nearby, untouched. He hadn't mounted it in days. I've crossed territories following the stars, Gideon said quietly. Mapped them for traders, settlers, men who needed direction. Funny thing is, they led me here. Sabrina folded her hands to keep them from shaking. You don't have to give up your road for me. I know, he said. That's how I know it's my choice. He reached into his coat and pulled out a carefully folded parchment. When he spread it beneath the lantern's glow, Sabrina gasped. It was a star map, but unlike any she'd seen. Her sketches were there, his precise lines intertwined with her charcoal arcs. Dates marked their nights together. A small notation near a cluster of stars read, "First meteor we wished on together." You merged our maps, she whispered. I merged our stories, Gideon corrected. The sky didn't change. We did. Emotion swelled in her chest, threatening to spill. For years, she'd believed love ended in loss. To love again was to invite the sky to take something else from her. But the stars hadn't taken Gideon. They'd given him. I was afraid, Sabrina admitted, that loving you meant forgetting Thomas. Gideon stepped closer, his voice steady. Love doesn't erase, it adds. She nodded, tears slipping free. Then stay. The word felt like a vow. Gideon smiled, not wide, not dramatic but certain. He cupped her face, gently, waiting. When she leaned into his touch, the kiss they shared was soft and reverent, stitched together with patience and trust. Above them, a meteor streaked across the sky, blazing bright. They laughed, foreheads pressed together. Guess the sky approves, Gideon murmured. In the weeks that followed, Gideon built a permanent observatory beside the house, a simple wooden platform, with a pitched roof and wide-open sides. Sabrina filled it with journals, old and new. Together, they charted stars and seasons, grief and joy. Their love mapped not in possession, but in partnership. Neighbors came to call it the Widow's Watch, though Sabrina preferred Gideon's name for it. Home. On quiet nights, they lay beneath the stars, hands entwined, whispering stories to constellations that felt newly born. Love, Sabrina realized, wasn't written in fate. It was written in choice, and the sky, vast and endless, held room for it all. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more Western love stories written in the stars.